For as a matter of interest, I mean, again, the school teacher in me has to ask is, those who speak Polish or are Polish, could they put up their hands so we know? All right, oh yes. And those who aren't quite sure or don't know very much about Herbert, everybody knows a little bit. All right, all right, all right. Okay, all right. As I say, even in Herbert's earliest poems are elegies for his youth in a way. There is a kind of burnt-out zone where there should have been erotic adolescence. He is a great poet, unexpectedly sparse and erotic poetry. There are love poems, there are poems about fidelity, but there's very little of that juice and joy of the force that through the green fuse drives the flower until you're about 25 or 30 or 40, or if you're W.B. Yeats, 75, or if you're Czeslaw Miłosz, 94. But anyway, this is his poem to Apollo, page 14. Again, lamenting, distrusting a certain kind of classical ideal of beauty. To Apollo, he went in a rustle of stone robes. He cast a shadow, a glow of laurels. His breaths were light as a statue's, but his movement like a flower's. Wrapped by the sound of his own song, he raised a lyre to the height of silence. Immersed in himself, his pupils white as a stream, stone from his sandals to the ribbons of his hair. I imagined your fingers, had faith in your eyes, the unstrung instrument, the arms without hands. Give me back youth's shout, arms held out, and my head in an immense crest of delight. Give me back my hope, speechless white head. Silence, a fissured neck. Silence, a broken song. Section 2. I, slow diver, won't reach the rock bottom of youth. Now I fish out only salty, broken torsos. Apollo appears to me in dreams with the face of a fallen Persian, defeated by the Greeks, the Persian. Poetry's auguries are false. It all happened differently. The epic's fire was different. The city's fire was different. Heroes did not return from the expedition. There were no heroes. The unworthy survived. I am seeking a statue drowned in my youth. Only an empty pedestal remains, a trace of a hand seeking a form. The next poem is a little longer, and many of you will not need it, but I thought it would be interesting to read a poem that is about the compromises made by artists, perhaps understandably in many cases, except in Herbert's. No compromise. And this is a rather longer, and I think it's not as intense a lyric poem as Herbert has written, but I think it is useful to give you a sense of what Herbert stood against consciously himself. It's called A Life, and it's, let me see, it's Herbert's reduced version of Miłosz's The Captive Mind. You know, that's a great classic of the Cold War where he describes how people convince themselves that they can conform to the new regime. A life, the life of the state artist under the communist regime. He wrote his first poem on a rose and bathed his fake in teary rain, weepy rain. Gymnasium, Class 2A. He swore in his one and only heart that he would always defend the beautiful, that he would never go in fear of violence, that never, never, always, always. Under his school desk, that boy now lies, clasping to his breast a helpless confession, a kind of love poem. On the desk, his name, the formula for a Cohn's volume, the declension of puer bonus, the word yadzia. Second two. This is the war experience suddenly coming. The caretaker ran out with a big bell, opened his mouth, and sounded the fire alarm. Pictures quickly turned away. The white building turned red. Then trees entered the picture, trees that stood by the school. Into the schoolyard where boys were playing, armed men came running, and a game of catch began. Those who were able to run to the wood went on playing cops and robbers. These are the people who went into the resistance taken. That one from 2A, but in fact that boy was quite different. Trading currencies, beaten on the face, taken for execution, lying on concrete, stubbornly crawling to the bowl filled with hunger for life, stripped to the bone, yet still alive. When he was freed, he wept for shame for the second time. Young poet bewildered. Justice should be rendered to him. He wasn't easily reconciled to life. The rapid stream of events quickened. He stood in a wilderness and howled. He searched the ruin for memories, prayed with the names of the dead. Poetry is the sister of memory, guards bodies in the wilderness. Poems' murmurs are worth no more than the breath of others they carry. He sits by himself at a little table, drums his fingers, summons a void. A well-meaning fellow comes up, sits down and says, "I can't bear to see how you suffer. And your writing is getting worse. You're being sucked dry by the greedy mouths of the dead. You're being sucked dry by the greedy mouths of the dead. On your one string, you play a mosquito's complaint. You will be cast off by the greedy arms of the living. I know it's hard to be reconciled. Not everything is exactly the way it ought to be. But please turn around and step into the future. Leave memories behind. Enter the land of hope. You tried to out-yell time, addressing the dead. Now try to out-yell time, addressing the future. No one wants you to betray yourself. Stick to your subject. Write on what is not." At night the poet reads economics pamphlets. At night the poet builds a paradise for his dead. It is a white rectangle like a block of cheese where each has a hole, oily and quiet and warm. Paradise will be finished when the class struggle ends. And when from 1 hectare we will get a given amount, then 1 billion light bulbs will light up and loudspeakers sing out. Again, the poet is writing, summoning the unborn to the future's paradise. Over a rocky precipice, he spans a straw bridge. He runs across it, light-hearted as hope. They rebuilt the poet, his table downtown. They rebuilt the cafe, a fish tank for artists. He's no longer alone. Sitting with him are a young musician, a certain sculptor, a red-maned critic, and 2 girl models. How great to march with the people, the poet thinks, and shuffles his feet onto the table. Sometimes they discuss whether the dictatorship of the proletariat may exclude art in the true sense. Sometimes, I repeat that, sometimes they discuss whether the dictatorship of the proletariat may exclude art in the true sense. Then they look at each other and with a burst of laughter at not having kicked the habit of rhetorical questions. Armchairs, 217. These are a little selection of shorter prose poems with one very famous lyric poem called Pebble. Poems about, on one hand, compromise, weakness, and on the other hand, complete integrity. Armchairs, the prose poem. Who ever thought a warm neck would become an armrest, or legs eager for flight and joy could stiffen into 4 simple stilts? Armchairs were once noble flower-eating creatures. However, they allowed themselves too easily to be domesticated, and today they are the most wretched species of quadrupeds. They have lost all their stubbornness and courage. They are only meek. They haven't trampled anyone or galloped off with anyone. They are, for certain, conscious of a wasted life. The despair of armchairs is revealed in their creaking. No. Well, armchairs have lost all, they are kind of conformist and they've lost their individuality and so on. Objects, page 131. This is an example of how it should be. Objects are a good example for subjective creatures. These are by the dozen in this book. They're wonderful. You could just open the book, read anything. Inanimate objects are always correct and cannot, unfortunately, be reproached with anything. I have never observed a chair shift from one foot to another, or a bed rear on its hind legs. And tables, even when they are tired, will not dare to bend their knees. I suspect that objects do this from pedagogical considerations, to reprove us constantly for instability. There we go.
Przedmioty martwe są zawsze w porządku. Nic im niestety nie można zarzucić. Nie udało mi się nigdy zauważyć krzesła, które przestępuje z nogi na nogę, ani łóżka, które staje dęba. Także stoły, nawet kiedy są zmęczone, nie odważą się przyklęknąć. Podejrzewam, że przedmioty robią to ze względów wychowawczych, aby wciąż nam wypominać naszą niestałość.
Pebble. This is a poem, very famous poem by Herbert. Again, an instruction in good behavior in the ethical life. The pebble is a perfect creature, equal to itself, mindful of its limits, filled exactly with a pebbly meaning, with a scent which does not remind one of anything, does not frighten anything away, does not arouse desire. Its ardor and coldness are just and full of dignity. I feel a heavy remorse when I hold it in my hand, when its noble body is permeated by false warmth. Pebbles cannot be tamed. To the end, they will look at us with a calm and very clear eye. What do you think? You're right. These are a couple more of his prose poems. I'm very fond of this one, partly because of its excellence as a description, partly because of its allegorical force. It's called Hen, H-E-N. Great subject for a poem, a test for any writer, I would have thought. Prose poem. The hen is the best example of what living constantly with humans leads to. She has completely lost lightness and grace of a bird. Her tail sticks up over her protruding rump like a too large hat in bad taste. Her rare moments of ecstasy, when she stands on one leg and glues up her round eyes with filmy eyelids, are stunningly disgusting. And in addition, that parody of song, throat-slashed supplications over a thing unutterably comic, a round, white, maculated egg. The hen brings to mind certain poets. Classic. A great wooden ear lined with cotton wool and the tedium of Cicero. A great stylist, so they say. Nowadays, no one writes sentences that long anymore. And what erudition! He can even read some. So he can even read stone. Only he never figures out that the veins in the marble of Diocletian's baths are the burst blood vessels of slaves from the stone quarters. Always the document of civilization marked with the blood of barbaric activity. Apollo and Marsyas. This is one of his most famous poems. It's in your handouts. Maybe we should use it. Yeah. There's no actual page numbers in this, but you'll find them halfway through. I should tell you, I mean, you probably know about Apollo and Marsyas. Marsyas, the centaur, who was part of a Dionysiac, he followed around after Cybele, and he found a flute lying on the grass in Phrygia. The flute had been dropped by Athene, a goddess of order, beauty, and so on. Athene had played this flute to the gods, and Aphrodite and Hera had laughed at her. She didn't know what was wrong. So she went and played it over a pool of water, and she saw that when she played it, her cheeks bursted up and she looked ridiculous. So she threw it down. Along comes Marsyas, picks it up, and discovers that the divine music of Athena still comes from the flute. So he goes around Phrygia playing it and entertaining it, and goes around in the train of Cybele. And people say, "You are a great flautist, you're as good as Apollo." And he doesn't deny them. So, very dangerous. Not to say, "Oh, no, Apollo's far better than me." So Apollo comes along and challenges Marsyas to a duel. The judges will be the Muses. The winner will be allowed to dictate the prize, any terms. So the first time they play, himself on the stringed lyre, himself on the flute. And the Muses say, "Oh, it's magnificent, both of you." Kind of a draw. And then, well, Apollo issues a challenge. He said, "I'll play my instrument upside down. You play yours upside down." Well, apparently it's easier to play a lyre upside down and go back with the strings. A flute, no way. Anyway, Marsyas loses, and Apollo chooses to flay him as his reward. And he flays him and nails his skin to a pine tree. And that is where Apollo and Marsyas, the poem, begins. A poem about witnessing and about what art has to live with, had to live with in the 20th century, in this cruel, not just a low, dishonest decade, but the era of fire and blood and torture.